To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations Built on Steel. Marshall Schultz stood in his garage workshop, the familiar weight of a steel wrench in his calloused hands. At 34, he'd built his construction business from nothing, starting with a beat-up pickup truck and a toolbox inherited from his father. Now, Schultz Construction employed 43 people and had just landed the contract to renovate downtown Portland's historic courthouse. The sound of Diane's Honda pulling into the driveway brought a smile to his weathered face. After 8 years of marriage, that sound still meant home to him. He'd met Diane Olson at a coffee shop near her accounting firm, where she'd been buried in spreadsheets during her lunch break. She was brilliant with numbers, methodical in everything she did, and had the kind of laugh that could pull him out of any bad mood. "Marshall, you in there making something explode again?" Diane called from the kitchen doorway, her voice carrying that familiar teasing tone. "Just fixing the neighbor's lawnmower," he replied, wiping his hands on an old rag. "Mrs. Patterson brought it over this morning. Said it's been acting up." Diane appeared in the garage doorway, still wearing her navy business suit from Valdez and Associates, the mid-sized accounting firm where she'd worked for 3 years. She looked tired, more so than usual. "Long day?" Marshall asked, noting the slight tension around her green eyes. "The usual. Mr. Valdez has been pushing everyone pretty hard lately. Big audit coming up for the Morrison Group." She shrugged, but Marshall caught something in her voice, a hesitation he hadn't heard before. Marshall had met Kurt Valdez exactly twice. Once at the firm's Christmas party 2 years ago, and again at a charity fundraiser last spring. Both times, the man had struck Marshall as the type who'd step on his own mother to climb a ladder. Valdez was in his early 40s, silver-haired, with the kind of practiced smile that never reached his eyes. He drove a BMW, wore expensive suits, and had a way of looking through people he considered beneath him. "How's the courthouse project coming?" Diane asked, changing the subject as she always did when work stress got to her. "Foundation inspection passed this morning. We'll start on the interior demo next week." Marshall closed the lawnmower's housing and tested the pull cord. It roared to life on the first try. "Mrs. Patterson's going to be happy." That evening, they sat on their back porch sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset paint the Portland skyline. This was their ritual, a few stolen moments before the day officially ended. Marshall had learned early in their marriage that Diane needed these quiet spaces to decompress from the corporate world she navigated daily. "Remember when we first looked at this house?" Diane asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "You said the kitchen was too small and the backyard needed work. And you said you could fix both." She smiled up at him. "You were right about the backyard. Still working on the kitchen," Marshall admitted. But Rome wasn't built in a day. Rome didn't have Mrs. Patterson bringing over broken appliances every week either. They laughed, and for a moment, everything felt perfectly normal. Marshall had no way of knowing that in less than 48 hours, their carefully constructed world would crack down the middle. Chapter 2. When Foundations Crack. Tuesday started like any other. Marshall was at the courthouse by 6 a.m., reviewing blueprints with his foreman, Andy York. The morning crew was preparing to strip out the old courtroom paneling, a delicate job that required preserving the original moldings while updating the electrical systems behind them. "The city inspector wants to see us maintain the architectural integrity," Andy said, pointing to a section of the plans. "But some of these support beams are questionable." Marshall studied the markings. "We'll shore them up properly. This building's going to outlast all of us." His phone buzzed with a text from Diane, "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." The third text like that in 2 weeks. Marshall frowned but pushed the thought aside. Audit season was always brutal for accountants. By 5 p.m., the crew had successfully removed 3 sections of paneling without damaging the original woodwork. Marshall was reviewing the day's progress when his phone rang. "Marshall," Diane's voice sounded strained. "I'm going to be even later than I thought. Mr. Valdez wants me to review some files tonight." "How late are we talking? Maybe 10? 11? There was background noise, traffic, maybe voices. "I'm sorry, honey. I know we planned to look at kitchen cabinet samples tonight. Don't worry about it. The cabinets can wait." Marshall tried to keep the disappointment out of his voice. "Drive safe, okay?" "I will. Love you." Marshall spent the evening in his workshop, building a bookshelf for their bedroom. Physical work helped him think, and something about Diane's recent behavior nagged at him. Not suspicion. Trust was the foundation of their marriage. But concern. She seemed stretched thin, stressed in a way that went beyond normal work pressure. At 11:15, headlights swept across the garage windows. Marshall set down his sandpaper and walked to the kitchen, arriving just as Diane came through the door. The first thing he noticed was her limp. "Diane." He moved toward her. "What happened to your leg?" "Nothing serious." She forced a smile, but Marshall caught how she favored her left side. "Just clumsy me. I tripped on the curb outside the office building." "Let me take a look." "It's fine, really." She moved past him toward the stairs. "Just bruised. I'm going to take a hot bath and go to bed." Marshall watched her climb the stairs, noting how she gripped the banister tighter than usual. The explanation made sense. The sidewalks downtown were notoriously uneven, especially near the older buildings. But something in her voice reminded him of the contractor who'd tried to hide structural damage on a job site last year. The same careful tone people used when they were managing information. He gave her space, finishing up in the workshop before heading upstairs. The bathroom door was closed, but he could hear the bath running. When Diane emerged 20 minutes later in her pajamas, she moved more normally. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Much." She kissed his cheek. "Thanks for not fussing." They went to bed, but Marshall lay awake listening to Diane's breathing. She fell asleep quickly, too quickly for someone who wasn't exhausted. When he was certain she was deeply asleep, he slipped out of bed and went downstairs. Diane's purse sat on the kitchen counter where she'd left it. Marshall hesitated. They'd never been the type of couple who snooped through each other's things. But the worry eating at him wouldn't quit. Her phone showed nothing unusual. Texts about work, a few messages with her sister, grocery list reminders. No missed calls except from him. No strange numbers or deleted messages that he could see. He was about to put the phone back when he noticed the timestamp on her last outgoing call. She'd called someone at 6:47 p.m., almost 2 hours after she'd told him she was working late, and from a number that wasn't in her contacts. Marshall memorized the number and went back to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. In the construction business, you learn to trust your instincts about structural integrity. When something looked wrong, it usually was wrong. The trick was figuring out how wrong before the whole thing came down. Chapter 3. The Crack Widens. Wednesday brought unseasonable rain that turned the courthouse renovation into a careful dance around tarps and timing. Marshall spent the morning coordinating with the electrical subcontractor, but his mind kept drifting to the strange phone call on Diane's phone. By lunch, he'd made a decision. He dialed the number. "Valdez and Associates, this is Kurt." The voice was smooth, confident, exactly what Marshall remembered from their brief encounters. Marshall hung up without speaking. Why had Diane called her boss at nearly 7 p.m.? And why from a number that wasn't saved in her contacts? The afternoon crawled by. Marshall found himself checking his phone every few minutes, hoping for a text from Diane that would explain everything. Instead, he got a call from Mrs. Patterson about her garbage disposal. "I'll stop by tonight and take a look," he promised, grateful for the distraction. Diane's car was already in the driveway when he got home at 6:30. She stood at the kitchen counter, still in her work clothes, chopping vegetables for dinner. "You're home early," Marshall observed. "Caught up on the Morrison audit files." She didn't look up from the cutting board. "Thought I'd make that stir-fry you like." Marshall watched her work. Her movements were precise as always, but there was something different about the way she held herself. A stiffness that hadn't been there last week. "How's your leg feeling?" "Better. Still a little sore." She gestured toward the dining room. "Could you set the table? I want to get this started before the vegetables get soggy." During dinner, Marshall tried to read between the lines of their conversation. Diane talked about the audit, about office politics, about anything except whatever was making her tense up every time he asked about her day. When she mentioned Kurt Valdez, it was in passing, the way she might mention any coworker. After dinner, Marshall went to help Mrs. Patterson with her garbage disposal. The elderly widow lived alone in the house next door and had become something of an unofficial grandmother to the neighborhood. Her disposal had been making grinding noises for weeks. "It's probably something stuck in the blades," Marshall diagnosed, flashlight in hand as he peered under the sink. "You're such a good neighbor, Marshall," Mrs. Patterson said. "That wife of yours is lucky to have a man who can fix things." 20 minutes later, Marshall had extracted a penny and 2 bottle caps from the disposal. Mrs. Patterson insisted on sending him home with leftover apple pie. "How's Diane doing?" she asked as he prepared to leave. "I saw her come home last night looking a bit roughed up." Marshall paused. "Roughed up?" "Well, not roughed up exactly. But she was walking funny, and her blouse looked like it had been, I don't know, wrinkled? Like she'd been in a tussle." Mrs. Patterson adjusted her glasses. "Probably just had a long day at that office. Those corporate types work their people too hard." Marshall thanked her for the pie and walked home slowly, Mrs. Patterson's words echoing in his head. By the time he reached his front door, a cold certainty had settled in his stomach. Diane was in the living room, laptop open, working on what looked like spreadsheets. She glanced up when he entered. "Mrs. Patterson okay?" "Yeah, just a penny stuck in her disposal." Marshall sat down across from her. "Diane, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." Her fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. "Okay, what really happened to your leg yesterday?" For a moment, she didn't respond. Then she closed the laptop and looked at him directly. "I told you. I tripped on the curb. Mrs. Patterson saw you come home. She said you looked like you'd been in some kind of struggle." Color drained from Diane's face. "Mrs. Patterson needs new glasses. Show me the bruise." "Marshall, show me." Slowly, Diane rolled up her sleeve. The bruise on her left forearm was large and dark, roughly the size of a man's hand. But it wasn't the type of bruise you got from falling on a curb. Marshall had seen enough construction site injuries to recognize fingerprint patterns in bruised flesh. "Who did this to you?" Diane pulled her sleeve back down. "Nobody did anything to me. I fell. Someone grabbed you hard enough to leave fingerprints." Marshall's voice stayed level, but something cold and dangerous was building in his chest. "I'm going to ask you one more time. What happened?" Tears started forming in Diane's eyes. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the coffee table. Then Diane's composure cracked. He was upset about some discrepancies in the Morrison files. "He thought I'd made an error that could cost the firm the contract." The words came out in a rush. "He was yelling, and I tried to explain, and he grabbed my arm. Hard. But it was only for a second, and then he realized what he'd done and apologized. He put his hands on you." "It wasn't like that, Marshall. He was just frustrated." "He put his hands on you." Marshall stood up. "And you covered for him." "I don't want to make trouble at work. If I report this, it becomes a whole thing. HR, investigations, lawyers. And for what? A bruise that'll be gone in a week." Marshall walked to the window and stared out at the dark street. 8 years of marriage, and he'd never seen Diane lie to him before tonight. Not about anything that mattered. The fact that she'd felt the need to protect her boss over her own husband told him everything he needed to know about Kurt Valdez. "I'm calling him." "Marshall, no. Please don't make this worse." But Marshall was already dialing. Kurt Valdez answered on the second ring. "This is Marshall Schultz, Diane's husband." A pause. "Oh, hello, Marshall. Everything all right? I want to know what happened in your office yesterday." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm not sure what you mean. My wife came home with bruises on her arm. Bruises that match fingerprints. I think there's been some misunderstanding." "What happened?" The friendly tone vanished from Valdez's voice. "Look, Schultz, workplace incidents are between employees and management. I don't discuss internal matters with spouses. You put your hands on my wife. Diane is an excellent employee, but she made an error that cost us a significant contract opportunity. I may have been emphatic in expressing my disappointment." Marshall felt his jaw clench. Emphatic. These things happen in high-pressure environments. "I'm sure Diane told you it was nothing serious. So you did grab her." "I touched her arm. Briefly. To get her attention." Valdez's voice had turned cold and dismissive. "So what?" "I hit her." "What are you going to do about it?" The line went quiet. Marshall realized he'd stopped breathing. "Did you just say you hit my wife?" "You heard me. What are you going to do about it?" Marshall hung up without another word. Behind him, Diane was watching with wide eyes. "What did he say?" Marshall looked at his wife. Brilliant, trusting Diane, who'd been protecting a man who'd just casually admitted to hitting her. Who'd asked what Marshall was going to do about it like it was some kind of challenge. "Pack a bag," Marshall said quietly. "You're staying at your sister's tonight." "Marshall, what did he say?" "Just pack a bag. Please." While Diane gathered her things, Marshall went to his workshop and opened the metal toolbox where he kept important documents. Beneath the warranty papers and instruction manuals was a small black address book that he hadn't touched in 5 years. Some numbers you never forget. Some favors you save for when they really matter. He picked up his phone and scrolled to a contact he'd hoped never to use. Terry? It's Marshall Schultz. I need a favor. Chapter 4. Blueprints of the Past. Terry Ash arrived at Marshall's house at 6 a.m. Thursday morning, looking exactly the same as he had 5 years ago when Marshall had last seen him. Medium height, compact build, with the kind of pale blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. He wore a simple gray suit and carried a leather portfolio that could have belonged to any insurance adjuster or tax preparer. Coffee, Marshall offered, leading Terry into the kitchen. Black. Terry sat at the kitchen table and opened his portfolio. You said Kurt Valdez, the accountant. That's right. Terry pulled out a yellow legal pad and clicked a pen. Tell me everything. Marshall had met Terry 8 years ago when a subcontractor tried to extort money from Schultz Construction by threatening to report imaginary safety violations. The subcontractor had connections with some unsavory people who specialized in making problems for small business owners. Marshall had been desperate enough to ask around for help, and a friend of a friend had given him Terry's number. Terry Ash was a problem solver. He didn't advertise his services, didn't have a website or business cards. He specialized in situations where conventional solutions, lawyers, police, official channels, weren't practical or effective. His methods were thorough, creative, and completely off the books. The subcontractor had not only dropped his extortion attempt, but had left town within a month. Marshall had paid Terry's fee and hoped never to need his services again. Your wife works for Valdez, Terry said, taking notes as Marshall explained the situation. How long? 3 years. She's a senior accountant there. And Valdez assaulted her yesterday. He grabbed her hard enough to leave bruises. When I called him about it, he admitted hitting her. Said it was no big deal and basically dared me to do something about it. Terry looked up from his notes. You recorded the call? No. But Diane witnessed my side of the conversation. Witnesses are good. Terry made another note. What do you want done? The question Marshall had been wrestling with all night. What did he want? An apology seemed laughably inadequate. Going to the police would mean Diane's work situation would become public, and she'd already made it clear she didn't want that. Filing a civil lawsuit could take years and would cost more than it was worth. I want him to understand that actions have consequences, Marshall said finally. I want him to regret putting his hands on my wife. Regret can be arranged in different degrees, Terry said. How much regret are we talking about? Marshall had spent the night thinking about that too. Kurt Valdez was a bully who'd escalated to physical violence because he thought he could get away with it. Men like that only understood power. Enough regret that he never touches anyone else's wife. Terry nodded and made a final note. I'll need 48 hours to put together a complete picture. Background, finances, relationships, weaknesses. Then we'll discuss options. What kind of options? The kind that solve problems permanently. Terry closed his portfolio. One thing, Marshall. Once we start down this road, we finish it. No second thoughts, no backing out because you get nervous. Are you sure this is what you want? Marshall thought about Diane's forced smile when she'd lied about her injury, about the casual arrogance in Valdez's voice when he'd admitted hitting her, about the kind of man who thought his position gave him the right to hurt people. I'm sure. After Terry left, Marshall called in sick to work and spent the day researching Kurt Valdez online. The man had a significant digital footprint, professional photos, company bio, social media posts showing expensive vacations and charity events. Valdez had graduated from Portland State with an MBA, worked for a large firm in Seattle before starting his own practice 6 years ago. He was divorced, no children, and lived in a condo in the Pearl District that probably cost more than Marshall made in 2 years. On the surface, Kurt Valdez looked like exactly what he was. A successful businessman with good connections and expensive tastes. But Marshall had learned in construction that surface appearances could hide serious structural problems. That evening, Diane called from her sister's house. How are you doing? She asked. I'm fine. How's Frances treating you? She's making me watch romantic comedies and eat ice cream. Says it's therapy. Diane paused. Marshall, I know you're angry, but please don't do anything that'll make this situation worse. I'm not going to do anything stupid. Promise me. Marshall looked out the kitchen window at Mrs. Patterson's house, where warm light glowed in every window. Normal people living normal lives, dealing with normal problems like broken garbage disposals and overgrown lawns. I promise I won't do anything stupid, he said, which was technically true. What he was planning wasn't stupid at all. Chapter 5. Structural Weaknesses. Friday afternoon, Terry called with an address in Southeast Portland. Coffee shop on Hawthorne. 1 hour. Marshall found Terry in a corner booth, nursing black coffee and reading a newspaper like any other customer. He slid a manila folder across the table when Marshall sat down. Kurt Valdez is an interesting man, Terry said without preamble. The folder contained photographs, financial records, and what looked like surveillance notes. Marshall flipped through pages of meticulous documentation. How did you get all this? Public records, mostly. Property tax filings, business licenses, court documents. Amazing what people make available if you know where to look. Terry turned a page in his newspaper. Valdez has 3 weaknesses: money, image, and control. The financial records showed that despite his expensive lifestyle, Kurt Valdez was leveraged to the hilt. The BMW was leased, the Pearl District condo had a massive mortgage, and he owed significant money to several creditors. His accounting firm showed healthy revenues but thin profit margins. He's living paycheck to paycheck, Marshall observed. Worse, he's been robbing Peter to pay Paul for at least 18 months. Moving money between accounts, delaying vendor payments, the whole shell game. Terry pointed to a highlighted section. The Morrison Group audit your wife mentioned? Valdez is hoping that contract saves his business. What about image? Terry pulled out another set of documents. Valdez sits on 2 charity boards and belongs to an exclusive downtown business club. His professional reputation is everything to him. One serious scandal would destroy his client base. And control. He's a micromanager who can't delegate. Makes every decision himself, signs every check, approves every expense. The business would collapse if he were unavailable for more than a few days. Marshall studied the surveillance photos. Valdez leaving his condo building, arriving at his office, having lunch at expensive restaurants. A man going through the motions of success while scrambling to keep his world from falling apart. What are you thinking? Terry asked. I'm thinking that when someone's house of cards is already wobbling, it doesn't take much to knock it down. Terry smiled for the first time since Marshall had known him. Now you're thinking like a problem solver. They spent the next hour going over details. Valdez's schedule, his habits, his vulnerabilities. By the time Marshall left the coffee shop, they had the framework of a plan that would give Kurt Valdez the education and consequences he so richly deserved. That evening, Marshall called Diane to check in. When are you coming home? She asked. Soon. I just need to take care of a few things first. Marshall, you're scaring me. This isn't like you. She was right about that. The Marshall Schultz she'd married was a straightforward man who solved problems with hard work and honest dealing. But that Marshall had never had to face a situation where someone hurt his wife and dared him to do something about it. I love you, he said instead of trying to explain. Everything's going to be fine. Promise. I promise. Saturday morning, Marshall drove to a storage facility in Gresham where he rented a small unit under a business name that existed only on paper. Terry had arranged the paperwork, one of many services he provided for clients who needed to keep certain assets private. Inside the unit was a collection of items that Marshall had hoped never to use. Untraceable cell phones, laptop computers with anonymous internet connections, and cash in small bills. The storage unit was his insurance policy, set up years ago when the extortion attempt had taught him that sometimes good people needed to be prepared for bad situations. He activated one of the cell phones and called the number Terry had given him. Pacific Investigation Services, a professional-sounding woman answered. I'd like to schedule a consultation regarding a domestic violence situation, Marshall said, reading from the script Terry had prepared. Certainly. Are you the victim or a concerned party? Concerned party. My sister-in-law is being abused by her employer. The woman took down the details of a fictional case involving Kurt Valdez and scheduled an appointment for the following Tuesday. By the time the investigation service discovered there was no actual client, the wheels would already be in motion. Marshall made 4 more calls that afternoon, each to a different agency, each reporting various concerns about Kurt Valdez's behavior. Animal Control received a tip about neglect in his condo building. The IRS got an anonymous report about potential tax irregularities. The state licensing board heard from a former client with concerns about professional misconduct. Individually, each report would warrant minimal investigation. Together, they would create a pattern of scrutiny that would have Kurt Valdez feeling like his life was under a microscope. But the real masterpiece was yet to come. Chapter 6. The Foundation Cracks. Sunday morning, Marshall put the final piece of his plan into motion. He drove to an internet cafe in downtown Portland, paid cash for 2 hours of computer time, and logged in using credentials Terry had provided. The cafe was the kind of place that catered to people who needed anonymous internet access. Teenagers avoiding parental controls, tourists checking email, and the occasional customer, like Marshall, who had business that required privacy. Using techniques Terry had taught him, Marshall created several fake social media profiles with photos pulled from stock photography sites. The profiles belonged to fictional employees of various Portland businesses, people who might realistically have had professional dealings with Kurt Valdez over the years. Each profile told a similar story. Kurt Valdez had been inappropriate with female employees. He had anger management issues. He was unethical in his business practices. The posts were carefully worded to avoid specific accusations that could be proven false, but together they painted a picture of a man with serious character problems. Marshall scheduled the posts to go live over the following week across multiple platforms. Social media algorithms would ensure the content spread naturally as people shared and commented on what appeared to be legitimate concerns about a local business owner. The beauty of the plan was its subtlety. Nothing could be traced back to Marshall, and individually each element appeared to be the kind of organic social media activity that happened every day. But collectively, they would create a storm of negative attention around Kurt Valdez at precisely the moment when his business was most vulnerable. By Monday morning, the first anonymous tips would reach the various agencies. By Tuesday, the fake investigation service appointment would trigger questions about domestic violence. By Wednesday, the social media posts would begin appearing in search results for anyone looking up Kurt Valdez or his business. Marshall finished his work at the internet cafe and drove home to find Diane's car in the driveway. She was in the kitchen making coffee, still wearing the clothes she'd slept in at her sister's house. "I couldn't stay away any longer," she said when he walked in. "This is my home too. I'm glad you're back." "Are you?" "Because you've been acting like a stranger since Tuesday night." She turned to face him. "Talk to me, Marshall. What's going on in your head?" Marshall poured himself coffee and sat across from her at the kitchen table. "I've been thinking about what kind of man hits a woman and then brags about it." Kurt didn't brag. He asked me what I was going to do about it. Like it was a challenge. Marshall met her eyes. "What kind of man does that?" Diane was quiet for a long moment. "A man who's never faced consequences for his actions." "Exactly. So what are you planning to do?" "Because I know you, Marshall Schultz. You don't just let things go when someone hurts your family." Marshall had always loved how well Diane understood him. Even now, when he was operating in territory she'd never seen before, she could read the determination in his face. "I'm going to teach him about consequences." "How?" "You don't want to know the details." "Yes, I do." Marshall studied his wife's face. Diane was brilliant, ethical, and had spent 3 years building her career at Valdez and Associates. What he was planning would destroy Kurt Valdez professionally and personally. Once it started, there would be no going back, and Diane would need to find a new job regardless. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." So Marshall told her. Everything. The investigation, the reports to various agencies, the social media campaign, the careful timing designed to maximize damage. He watched Diane's expression change as she understood the scope and sophistication of what he'd put in motion. "This will ruin him," she said when he finished. "Yes. His business, his reputation, everything. That's the idea." Diane was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup. When she looked up, her green eyes were harder than Marshall had ever seen them. "Good," she said. "He deserves everything that's coming to him." Monday evening, Marshall's phone rang at exactly 6 p.m. "Marshall, it's Kurt Valdez." The voice that had been so confident and dismissive 3 days ago now sounded strained and uncertain. "What can I do for you, Kurt?" "I've been getting some unusual inquiries today. People asking questions about my business, my professional conduct. Do you know anything about that?" Marshall allowed himself a small smile. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot the other night. I think there might have been some misunderstanding about what happened with Diane." "Oh, there's no misunderstanding. You were very clear about what you did." "I was frustrated, okay? I said some things I shouldn't have said." But this campaign of harassment has to stop. Campaign of harassment. Don't play dumb with me, Schultz. I know it's you. Marshall leaned back in his chair. Kurt Valdez was smart enough to connect the dots, but that didn't matter now. The man had no way to prove anything, and even if he did, stopping the social media campaign wouldn't undo the damage already spreading through Portland's business community. I told you 3 days ago that actions have consequences, Marshall said. You didn't believe me. What do you want? Money? An apology? What I want is for you to understand that when you hurt someone's family, they hurt you back. Harder. The line went quiet for a moment. When Valdez spoke again, his voice had a different quality, the sound of a man who was beginning to understand how much trouble he was really in. This isn't over, Schultz. You're absolutely right, Marshall agreed. It's just getting started. He hung up and turned to Diane, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway. He's starting to panic, she observed. Good. Panic makes people make mistakes. What happens next? Marshall smiled at his wife. Brilliant, ethical Diane, who had spent the last few days discovering that she had a ruthless streak when someone threatened her family. Next, Kurt Valdez learns what happens when you challenge the wrong man's patience. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. Tuesday morning brought rain and the first real test of Marshall's plan. At 9 a.m., Kurt Valdez was scheduled to meet with the fake investigator about the domestic violence complaint. The investigator, actually one of Terry's associates, would ask probing questions about Valdez's relationship with his employees and take careful notes about his responses. By 10 a.m., 3 separate city departments would be conducting routine inspections of Valdez and associates. Building safety, fire marshal, business license compliance. Each inspection would find minor violations that required immediate attention and expensive corrections. By noon, the first wave of social media posts would be appearing in search results, shared by fake accounts with realistic engagement patterns that would fool most algorithm detection systems. Marshall spent the morning at the courthouse renovation, trying to maintain normal routines while his phone provided periodic updates from Terry. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. At 11:30, his phone rang. Marshall Schultz Construction. This is Marshall. Mr. Schultz, this is Christina Pineda from Channel 8 News. I'm working on a story about workplace harassment in Portland's professional services industry. I understand your wife works for Valdez and Associates. Marshall's blood chilled. They'd accounted for social media attention and regulatory scrutiny, but local news coverage could spiral beyond their control. I'm not sure what you're referring to, he said carefully. We've received several tips about inappropriate conduct at Valdez and Associates, including an allegation that Kurt Valdez physically assaulted a female employee. Would you be willing to provide a statement? No comment. Marshall hung up and immediately called Terry. We have a problem, he said when Terry answered. Channel 8 News is sniffing around. Expected, Terry replied calmly. Local reporters monitor police scanners and city inspection records. It was inevitable that someone would notice the pattern. This could get out of hand fast. Trust the plan, Marshall. Valdez is about to have a very bad day. At 12:45, Marshall's phone rang again. This time it was Diane, calling from work. Marshall, something's happening here. Kurt's been in his office all morning with the door closed, and there are people here asking questions. City inspectors, someone from the state, I think maybe a reporter. Are you okay? I'm fine, but the whole office is buzzing. People are scared. What if they shut us down? Marshall had prepared for this moment, but hearing the uncertainty in Diane's voice still made his chest tight. Everything's going to be fine. Just do your job and stay out of the way. At 1:15, Kurt Valdez called. You son of a bitch, he said without preamble. Do you have any idea what you've done? Enlighten me. I've got reporters calling, city inspectors crawling all over my building, and the state licensing board wants to schedule a formal review. My phones haven't stopped ringing all morning. Sounds like a busy day. This is harassment, Schultz. I can prove you're behind this. Really? How? Silence on the line. They both knew that Kurt Valdez had no proof of anything. Every complaint appeared to come from legitimate sources. Every inspection was technically routine. Every social media post was untraceably anonymous. What do you want? Valdez asked finally. I want you to resign from your position and close your business. Are you insane? I've spent 6 years building this company. Should have thought about that before you put your hands on my wife. I'll fight this. I'll fight you. Good luck with that. Marshall hung up and called Terry. How long before the social media posts reach critical mass? By tonight, anyone searching for Kurt Valdez or his business will find the harassment allegations in the first page of results. By tomorrow, it'll be trending in local social media circles. And the city inspections? Found enough violations to keep him busy for weeks. Nothing criminal, but expensive to fix and impossible to ignore. What about the reporter? She's building a story about workplace harassment in professional services. Kurt Valdez is becoming her prime example. Marshall spent the afternoon coordinating with his work crew while monitoring news feeds on his phone. By 3 p.m., the first online article appeared on a local news website. Allegations surface against Portland accounting firm owner. The article was carefully written to avoid legal liability, but it mentioned Kurt Valdez by name and described a pattern of concerning behavior reported by multiple sources. The reporter had done her homework, tracking down what appeared to be former employees and clients with negative experiences. Of course, most of those sources were fictional, created by Terry's team to provide quote material for exactly this purpose. By 5 p.m., the story had been shared across multiple social media platforms and was generating hundreds of comments. Some expressed shock and disappointment in a business owner they'd respected. Others shared their own stories of negative interactions with Valdez and associates. At 6 p.m., Diane came home looking exhausted. How bad was it? Marshall asked. Chaos. Kurt spent the whole day on the phone with lawyers, trying to figure out how to respond to everything. Half the staff went home early. She sat down at the kitchen table. The Morrison Group called this afternoon. They're postponing their audit pending resolution of the allegations. Marshall felt a moment of satisfaction. The Morrison Group contract was Kurt Valdez's lifeline. Without it, his business was doomed. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm not, Diane said firmly. Watching him panic was the best part of my day. Any regrets? Diane considered the question seriously. 3 days ago, I was protecting a man who hurt me because I didn't want to cause trouble at work. Tonight, he's discovering what real trouble looks like. She met Marshall's eyes. No regrets. Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from Terry. Phase 2 tomorrow. Be ready. What's Phase 2? Diane asked, reading over his shoulder. Tomorrow, Kurt Valdez discovers that his problems are just beginning. Chapter 8. The final pillar falls. Wednesday morning, Kurt Valdez woke up to find his life completely dismantled. Marshall knew this because Terry had arranged for real-time monitoring of the situation. Through a combination of digital surveillance and old-fashioned stakeout work, they could track Valdez's growing panic as each new disaster revealed itself. The first blow came at 6 a.m. when Valdez discovered that someone had leaked his client list to the local media. The Channel 8 reporter now had contact information for every business that used Valdez and Associates for accounting services. She was methodically calling each one to ask about their experiences with the firm. The second blow landed at 7 a.m. when the IRS called to schedule an audit of Valdez's personal and business tax returns based on an anonymous tip about potential irregularities. The third blow arrived at 8 a.m. in the form of a cease and desist letter from the Morrison Group, suspending all contract negotiations pending resolution of the harassment allegations. By 9 a.m., 3 more clients had called to terminate their services. Marshall received updates throughout the morning as he supervised electrical work at the courthouse. Terry's surveillance team reported that Valdez hadn't left his condo, hadn't showered, and appeared to be drinking heavily despite the early hour. At 10:30, Valdez called Marshall's number. Please, he said without preamble. I'll do whatever you want. Just make it stop. Make what stop? You know what? The reporters, the investigations, the social media campaign. All of it. I still don't know what you're talking about. I'll resign. I'll close the business. I'll leave Portland. Whatever you want. Marshall felt the satisfaction of a job well done. 3 days ago, Kurt Valdez had been an arrogant bully who thought his position made him untouchable. Now he was a broken man begging for mercy. Resigning isn't enough, Marshall said. Then what? What do you want? I want you to understand something, Kurt. When you hurt someone's family, you don't get to set the terms of your punishment. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry I grabbed Diane. I'm sorry I said what I said to you. I was wrong. You're sorry because you got caught. You're sorry because there are consequences. You're not sorry about what you did. I am sorry about what I did. Prove it. Silence on the line. Marshall could almost hear the gears turning in Valdez's head as he tried to figure out what proof would satisfy a man who'd just systematically destroyed his entire life. How? Valdez asked finally. Public apology. Full confession. Acknowledgement that you assaulted my wife and that you've created a hostile work environment for other women in your office. If I do that, I'll never work in this industry again. That's the point. You're asking me to destroy my career. I'm not asking anything. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You're going to confess publicly, or this situation is going to get much worse. How could it possibly get worse? Marshall smiled. Terry had saved the best for last. At 11 a.m. this morning, the Portland Police Bureau is going to receive a detailed complaint about your assault on Diane, complete with photographs of her injuries and a witness statement from Mrs. Patterson, who saw Diane come home in distress that night. You can't prove I hit her. I don't have to prove it. I just have to make the allegation credible enough for the police to investigate. And given everything else that's happening with your business right now, they're going to take that complaint very seriously. This is extortion. This is consequences. Marshall hung up and called Terry. Is everything in place for the police complaint? Standing by. The witness statement is prepared, and we have the photographs of Diane's bruises. One phone call, and Kurt Valdez becomes the subject of a criminal investigation. And if he agrees to the public confession, then he saves himself from criminal charges but destroys his professional reputation permanently. Either way, he loses. At 10:45, Kurt Valdez called back. I'll do it, he said, his voice hollow with defeat. The public apology. But I want immunity from criminal prosecution. You're not in a position to negotiate terms. I'm giving you what you want. I'm confessing publicly to assaulting your wife and creating a hostile workplace. That should be enough. Marshall considered the offer. A public confession would accomplish everything he'd set out to do. Kurt Valdez would be finished professionally, his behavior would be exposed, and other women would be warned about his character. The criminal complaint was leveraged to ensure compliance, not an end goal in itself. You have 1 hour to prepare a statement, Marshall said. Post it on your company website and all your social media accounts. Then call Channel 8 and read it on camera. After that, you resign and dissolve the business. And then this ends. At 11:30 a.m., a statement appeared on the Valdez and Associates website. I, Kurt Valdez, publicly apologize for my inexcusable behavior toward my employee Diane Schultz and other women in my workplace. On Tuesday, March 15th, I physically assaulted Ms. Schultz in my office, grabbing her arm with sufficient force to cause bruising. This was completely unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for my actions. I have also created a hostile work environment through inappropriate comments and behavior toward female employees over several years. Effective immediately, I am resigning from my position and dissolving Valdez and Associates. I am seeking professional help for my anger management issues and commit to making amends for the harm I have caused. The statement was shared across social media within minutes. By noon, it had been picked up by local news outlets. By evening, it would be part of Kurt Valdez's permanent digital footprint, ensuring that anyone who searched his name would find his confession. Marshall called Diane at work to let her know what had happened. It's over, he said simply. How do you feel? Marshall considered the question. 3 days ago, he'd been a straightforward construction contractor who solved problems with hard work and honest dealing. Today, he'd systematically destroyed a man's life using methods that existed in the gray areas between legal and illegal. He felt like himself again. I feel like justice was served, he said. Chapter 9, New Foundations. 1 month later, Marshall stood in the renovated courthouse lobby, watching afternoon sunlight stream through the restored windows. The project had finished 2 weeks ahead of schedule and under budget. The mayor was planning a dedication ceremony, and Schultz Construction was already fielding calls about other historic renovation projects. Looks good, Andy York said, joining Marshall in the lobby. Hard to believe this place was falling apart 6 months ago. Sometimes the foundation is stronger than it looks, Marshall replied. You just have to clear away the damage and build on what's solid. Diane had found a new job within a week of Kurt Valdez's public confession. A larger firm downtown had been impressed by her credentials and offered her a senior position with better pay and benefits. The Morrison Group had even asked her to complete their audit personally, having been impressed by her work during the initial phases. Kurt Valdez had kept his word about leaving Portland. Terry's sources reported that he'd relocated to a small town in eastern Oregon, where he was working as a bookkeeper for a farm equipment dealership. His professional license had been suspended pending a state board review that would likely result in permanent revocation. His expensive lifestyle was gone, his business was dissolved, and his reputation was permanently tainted. Marshall felt no sympathy for the man's circumstances. Kurt Valdez had made his choices, and those choices had consequences. Marshall, Andy pulled him from his thoughts. There's someone here to see you. Terry Ashe stood near the courthouse entrance, wearing the same gray suit and carrying the same leather portfolio. He looked as unremarkable as ever, exactly the kind of man people's eyes would slide past without really seeing. Afternoon, Marshall. Terry, what brings you downtown? Wanted to see how the project turned out. Terry looked around the lobby with what might have been genuine interest. Nice work. They walked outside into the late afternoon sun. Portland stretched out around them, a city of neighborhoods and small businesses, where people tried to live decent lives and solve their problems in civilized ways. Any loose ends I should know about? Marshall asked. All tied up. The social media accounts have been deactivated, the fake investigation reports have been resolved, and our mutual friend's situation has stabilized in its new equilibrium. Meaning Kurt Valdez has learned to keep his hands to himself, and he's not going to be in a position to hurt anyone else's wife. They stood quietly for a moment, watching traffic flow past the courthouse. Marshall thought about the man he'd been a month ago, someone who solved problems through hard work and honest dealing. That man still existed, but he now had access to resources and methods that most people never imagined. Do I owe you anything? Marshall asked. Consider it a professional courtesy, Terry replied. You did good work here, Marshall. Sometimes the system fails people, and they need other options. Other options. Justice isn't always delivered through official channels. Sometimes it requires private initiative. Terry handed Marshall a business card with only a phone number printed on it. In case you ever need those other options again. Marshall pocketed the card, though he hoped never to use it. Thanks. Give my regards to Diane. Terry walked away and disappeared into the crowd of downtown commuters heading home from work. Marshall watched him go, then pulled out his own phone and called his wife. How was your day? Diane asked when she answered. Good. Productive. How was yours? Excellent. The Morrison Group is so happy with my work that they're talking about a long-term contract. Could mean a significant raise. That's great news. I was thinking we should celebrate. Maybe dinner at that new place on Hawthorne. Marshall smiled, thinking about the kitchen renovation they'd been planning for months. With Diane's new job and the courthouse project's success bonus, they could finally afford those custom cabinets she'd been wanting. Sounds perfect. I'll pick you up at 6. Love you, Marshall. Love you too. Marshall put his phone away and took one last look at the courthouse. Solid foundations, careful craftsmanship, attention to detail. The same principles that applied to building anything that was meant to last. Whether it was restoring historic buildings or protecting your family, success came down to understanding what was truly important and being willing to do whatever it took to preserve it. Some things were worth fighting for. Some people needed to learn about consequences. And sometimes, the most important construction work happened outside official blueprints. Marshall Schultz had learned all of these lessons in the space of 4 days. As he walked to his truck, he carried with him the quiet satisfaction of a job well done and the knowledge that he would never again be helpless when someone threatened his family. In his pocket, Terry Ashe's business card waited like a tool he hoped never to need but was grateful to have. Because Marshall Schultz understood now that there were different kinds of problems in the world, and not all of them could be solved with honest work and good intentions. Some problems required other options, and he was prepared for whatever came next. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.